Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle of the American Civil War. Over 3 days of fighting, roughly 51,000 men would become casualties. Again, 51,000 men killed, wounded, missing, or captured. Of those 51,000 men, roughly 28,000 would be wounded, and every church, farmhouse, barn, building, shed for miles around the town of Gettysburg would be transformed into a field hospital. Ultimately, as many as 10,000 men would die as a result of the fighting at Gettysburg, and at least 7,000 are shot dead, killed outright on the battlefield. Initially following the battle, many of these dead are hastily buried, often by comrades, in shallow graves. Union soldiers, more often than not, would get, again, a shallow grave with some loose earth or rocks thrown on top, and often a headboard, a simple piece of wood with that man's name and maybe regiment carved or written on it. Confederates, by and large, were buried by the victorious Union Army, and more often than not, they were thrown in a mass grave, a burial trench, with 10, 20, 30 other men. After the battle, as the days turned into weeks, heavy rains would wash open a lot of these graves, and it's not uncommon to walk through the battlefield and see legs, heads, arms protruding from the ground. Animals running around, particularly hogs, would uproot a lot of these bodies, and it's not uncommon to see a hog with an arm or a leg in its mouth running across the battlefield. The rain is going to rot and erode away a lot of the men who were fortunate enough to have headboards, and these men are going to become unknown. Andrew Curtin, governor of Pennsylvania, will visit the battlefield only about a week following the fighting, and Andrew Curtin is determined to do something to clean up the town of Gettysburg, but also to ensure that the men who died fighting this battle get a decent and honorable burial. He'll work with a 32-year-old lawyer from Gettysburg named David Wills to create the cemetery you can see behind me. The Soldiers' National Cemetery is the final resting place for 3,500 Union men who were killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. And of these, roughly 979 are completely unknown, and they lie under the individual white stone blocks behind me. Otherwise, the men who fought here are buried by state. All the New Yorkers are in the New York plot. All the men from Massachusetts are in the Massachusetts plot. And these plots stretch across the hillside in a giant semicircle. No one state has a better spot than another. No one state or no individual is elevated above another. And in that way, the cemetery reflects the ideals and ideas of the men buried in it. But the men buried here, they never got a funeral. Words were never said over their graves. And on November 19, 1863, David Wills and Andrew Curtin will arrange for a giant consecration ceremony, a dedication ceremony, to set aside this new cemetery as hallowed ground. They'll invite dignitaries, politicians, men who fought in the battle, and they'll also invite President Abraham Lincoln. On November 2, 1863, Gettysburg attorney David Wills would write to Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, inviting Lincoln to travel to Gettysburg to take part in the consecration ceremony here at the Soldiers' National Cemetery. Wills invited Lincoln to give, quote, a few appropriate remarks. Lincoln accepted, and not long after would begin working on the speech he would deliver here at Gettysburg. On November 18th, Lincoln left Washington, D.C. via train to travel to this small Pennsylvania town. He arrived late in the evening, and that night spent the evening at the David Wills home, still standing in the square of Gettysburg today, and there in the upstairs bedroom put the finishing touches on the speech he would give the next day. November 19, 1863, the day of the dedication ceremony, began with a parade. The parade wound its way through the streets of Gettysburg, ending here on the hillside. As many as 15,000 people would have been on hand to take part in the ceremony, to hear Abraham Lincoln. Many of them were the townspeople of Gettysburg who had survived the battle. Others were soldiers who had fought here. Still more were widows who had lost husbands, or mothers who lost sons. The consecration ceremony itself began with a prayer, and a band played. And then Edward Everett, the main orator of the day, would stand up and give a stirring 2-hour oration. Then it was Lincoln's turn. Lincoln stood up on the platform, pulled a small piece of paper out of his pocket, and began to speak.